By the time I was escorted out of Dan Capital with a cardboard box and a dead laptop, I knew two things. My former boss had made a terrible mistake, and he had made it in writing. I was 26, vice president in title, janitor in workload, and apparently too useful to praise, but easy to blame. That morning, sometime in the early hours, I had walked into the glass conference room expecting a strategy review. Instead, I found Len Barrow from legal, my manager Dax Wynn with his silk tie and shark smile, and an HR director who could have taught Marble how to feel. Dax folded his hands like a man blessing a meal. Mina, this is a performance separation. Performance separation, a cute phrase for public beheading. I sat down slowly. Interesting. Yesterday my model saved your acquisition memo. He smiled wider. Teams evolve. That was insult number one. Insult number two came when he slid over a packet already tabbed in yellow. And in the margin of one page, beside a note about communication style, someone had typed that I lacked executive polish and had a tendency to sound defensive when challenged. Translation: I was right too often, and I did not smile while proving it. Then Dax made the fatal choice. He leaned back and said, "You are smart, Mina, but smart is not the same as trusted." That line landed harder than the firing. I had built half the diligence framework used in their biggest pending deal, in a cross-border infrastructure roll-up tied to pension money, sovereign funds, and a mountain of secured debt. Value: $1.5 billion. I knew where every obligation sat, where every indemnity was buried, and which subsidiary had a board that existed mostly on paper and pastries. Trusted. That word followed me to the elevator. On the ride down, I reviewed the severance packet. I always read before I reacted. Women who survived boardrooms learned that tears were expensive and paper was priceless. The agreement offered 12 weeks of pay, health coverage, a broad release of claims, and a non-disparagement clause drafted so aggressively it could have muzzled a ghost. It also included a certification that I had returned all proprietary materials and had no knowledge of misconduct requiring disclosure. That last sentence was so reckless I nearly laughed in the lobby. Because 3 nights earlier, while reviewing closing folders, I had found a chain of side letters tied to an entity called Lattice Bloom Transit Holdings. The letters altered control rights in a way not disclosed to 2 minority investors. Not a typo. Not a formatting glitch. A governance trap. If the roll-up closed as structured, voting power would shift after funding and leave the minority holders economically exposed, while Dax and 2 insiders gained hidden leverage through affiliate agreements. In plain English, they were selling one steering wheel and hiding the second. Was it criminal? I did not know yet. Was it ugly enough to trigger lawsuits, blown reps, and lender panic? Absolutely. I did not take files. I did not need to. My memory had fed on cap tables and board consents for years, and Dax, in his vanity, had CC'd me on too many emails. Outside, the wind snapped at my coat. My phone buzzed. My best friend Rhea, a trusts and estates lawyer with the soul of a duelist. How bad? I called her from the curb. They fired me, I said. Rhea went silent for one beat. Then I assumed they were stupid after that too. I looked at the severance packet. Exceptionally. Good. Stupid after cruel is where the money lives. I laughed, sharp and brief. By late afternoon, I was at Rhea's kitchen table, packet spread between us, with Noah Pike joining by video. Noah was a securities litigator who looked sleepy until someone lied on paper. Then he woke like a cathedral bell. He scanned the clauses. Do not sign. This release is broad, but more important, they are asking you to certify ignorance. That creates leverage if they already suspect exposure. I told them about Lattice Bloom, the side letters, the hidden control shift, the minority investors, the debt package, the pension capital. Noah stopped blinking. Rhea whistled low. Your boss fired the woman holding a match in a fireworks shed. No, I said, feeling something steadier than anger settle into my spine. He fired the woman who knows where the exits are. That evening, around sunset, I opened a fresh notebook. Not to rage, to map. Dates, deal entities, board approvals, investor rights. Everyone copied on what? Every statement Dax had made about transparency. Every inconsistency. People think revenge is heat. The satisfying kind is architecture. And mine was going to be built on governance, disclosure duties, and the oldest force in finance. Panic. I did not want Dax ruined. I wanted him audited by his own choices. That distinction matters. Emotion makes women in stories do reckless things. Documentation lets women in real life win quietly enough to hear the other side choke. Around midday the next day, Noah arranged a meeting with a forensic governance consultant named Eva Sloan. Ava had the dry expression of a woman who had spent years explaining to rich men that signatures count. We met in a borrowed conference room above a florist, which felt appropriate, and we were preparing an elegant funeral. I walked them through the deal from memory. Parent holdco at the top, regional operating entities below, a web of management agreements, preferred equity, debt covenants, and investor consent rights. Dax had pitched the structure as efficient. Efficient is a lovely word. It often means the ugly part has been moved where fewer people will look. Eva interrupted only to ask the useful questions. Who had formal board seats? Who approved the side letters? Were minority protections in the main operating agreement or a separate investor rights document? Was the lender package conditioned on accurate disclosure of affiliate control? That last one mattered most. Because if lenders believed control sat one way while secret side agreements shifted it another way, the whole financing stack could wobble. Not necessarily implode, but lenders do not enjoy surprises. And institutional investors dislike finding trapdoors beneath governance promises. Enough fear in the right room could freeze a deal worth $1.5 billion. That was the real stake. Not cash in a vault. Confidence in motion. I had no appetite for making wild accusations. That is how people lose credibility and cases. So we built the only thing stronger than outrage: a sequence. Dax had pushed revisions through late on a Friday, sometime in the evening, when half the team had mentally become soup. He had then circulated a summary deck omitting the side letters. 2 days later, he told investors on a diligence call that no undisclosed governance arrangements materially altered decision rights. I remembered the phrasing because it had bothered me. Lawyers write around bombs. Operators accidentally sit on them. Noah leaned back. If you can support that timeline, we do not need drama. We need recipients. Rhea grinned. My favorite kind of revenge. Decourtesy copies. We discussed options: internal whistleblower route, direct notice to outside deal counsel, protected communication to minority investors through their counsel if a reporting channel failed, potential labor claims tied to retaliatory termination if my firing connected to raising concerns. Also the severance trap, which now looked less like housekeeping and more like an attempted cleanup. Eva tapped the packet. This certification clause is fascinating, and they may have wanted a neat file. Instead, they created evidence of consciousness. I smiled for the first time all day. Dax always did think formatting was strategy. By early evening, I had a job interview lined up through a recruiter who had heard I was suddenly available. I took it anyway. Survival and revenge are cousins, not enemies. Women do not need to burn down their future to expose a liar. I put on lipstick, answered questions about execution discipline, and spoke calmly about scaling transactions across regulated entities. Meanwhile, my old firm was likely congratulating itself for removing an inconvenient young woman who noticed too much. After the interview, I went home to my tiny apartment and opened the Notes app where I kept personal rules. One of them was, never let humiliation make your decisions. Humiliation is loud, but it has terrible judgment. So I translated pain into steps. I drafted a factual memo for Noah. No adjectives, no speeches, just dates, participants, what I saw, what I was told, and what questions the documents raised. I noted that I was willing to cooperate with any lawful inquiry and that I was specifically refraining from sharing privileged materials or proprietary documents. That line mattered. A clean messenger is harder to discredit. Near nightfall, Ria called. "You sound calm," she said. "I am furious," I replied. "I am simply formatting it." She laughed. "That is the spirit." Then she said something I never forgot. "Men like Dax count on women confusing self-respect with silence. They think if they embarrass you enough, you will focus on proving you were worthy. Do not do that. Let him prove what he did." I stood by the window, watching lights blink across the neighboring building. In every office I had ever worked in, there was a version of this lesson hiding under the coffee machine and the quarterly goals. Read what you sign. Track what changes. Learn who owes duties to whom. Governance is not boring. It is the map of who can be cornered when the smiling stops. By the next morning, our memo was ready. And by the next afternoon, it was on its way to the one group Dax feared more than regulators, judges, or angry employees. The investors who still believed him. Money does not panic all at once. It twitches. Then it asks for a call. Then it hires outside counsel. The memo went to outside deal counsel first, through Noah, with a polite cover note so restrained it felt almost flirtatious. We were not alleging crimes. We were requesting urgent review of potentially undisclosed governance arrangements affecting control rights, investor protections, and lender reliance. Attached was my factual chronology, scrubbed clean of theater. 3 hours later, the twitch arrived. A partner from Venn Alder, the law firm handling the financing, requested a confidential interview. Not with me directly. High with Noah present. That told me two things. They were taking it seriously, and they were already thinking about privilege, exposure, and record creation. Rich problems wear expensive shoes. The interview took place sometime in the late afternoon. I wore navy, brought a notepad, and answered with the rhythm of a metronome. No speculation, no gossip. When I did not know something, I said so. When I remembered exact language from the diligence call, I repeated it. The partner, Sarah Quill, he had eyes like polished steel and the posture of someone accustomed to charging by the syllable. At one point, she asked, "Why were you terminated?" I let Noah speak first. He said there had been concerns about timing and potential retaliation, especially given my involvement in diligence review. Elegant, measured, sharp enough to cut fruit. Sarah nodded once, then asked the fatal question for Dax. "Had you raised any concerns internally before your separation?" "Yes," I said. I asked for clarification about side agreements affecting decision rights. I was told they were administrative, not material. "Who told you that?" "Dax Wynn." She wrote that down without changing expression, which somehow made it delicious. By the next day, the twitch became a shiver. One minority investor council requested confirmation that no supplemental governance agreements existed outside the disclosed data room. Another asked whether all affiliate arrangements had been fully presented to the investment committee. Lenders began sending technical questions that read like polite grenades. Inside Dan Capital, I imagined the atmosphere turning from smug to ceremonial panic. Assistants whispering. Partners closing doors. Dax speaking too fast. Legal teams searching inboxes with the intensity of archaeologists who suspect the skeleton might sue. Ria came over with takeout and watched me pace. You know what is funny? I said. He could have managed me out later. He could have given me a neutral exit. He could have avoided insulting my integrity. Ria opened her noodles. Vanity is the gift basket of revenge. I snorted. My phone lit up with a message from a former colleague, June Valek. Not from my team, but close enough to smell smoke. Is it true investors are asking about shadow control docs? I stared at the screen. Even rumors needed handling. I replied carefully. I cannot discuss confidential matters. You should make sure anything you sign or certify is accurate. June sent back a single word. Understood. That exchange stayed with me because it was the broader lesson in miniature. In business, your signature is a little bridge between your future and someone else's mess. Do not cross it blind. Near the end of the week, Noah called with the update I had been waiting for. The minority investor group has paused its approval process. One lender wants revised reps and indemnities. Another wants an independent review of governance disclosures. Closing will not happen on schedule. I sat down slowly. There it was. The giant machine, halted not by rage, but by questions. And Dax? I asked. He has been removed from external communications pending review. I laughed so hard I startled myself. Pending review, that is corporate for sent to the corner. Noah, who rarely indulged in joy, allowed himself a small one. There is more. Yet your severance packet is now awkward for them. Because once outside counsel understood that I may have been terminated after spotting governance issues, the release and certification clause stopped looking tidy and started looking predatory. Labor exposure plus securities exposure is the sort of duet that ruins golf weekends. 2 days later, I received a letter from Dan Capital's general counsel. Polite, sterile. They wished to revisit my separation terms, preserve open communication, and avoid misunderstandings. My favorite line was that the company values transparency. I framed that sentence mentally. Ria read the letter and cackled. They want to buy a fire extinguisher after setting the curtains on fire. No, I said, feeling colder and stronger than before. They want to buy me as a witness. I did not hate Dax then. Hate is intimate, and he no longer deserved intimacy. What I wanted was simpler. I wanted the record corrected. I wanted the deal rewritten in daylight. And I wanted the man who told me I was not trusted to learn what trust actually costs when investors withdraw it. The revised separation meeting happened in a neutral office suite with gray walls, expensive water, and enough confidentiality language to smother a horse. This time I arrived with Noah. Dan Capital sent Len from legal and a new HR executive, whose voice suggested she had once apologized for a flood in the same tone. Dax was not there. That absence was sweeter than dessert. Len slid over a new proposal: more money, extended benefits, neutral reference language, a narrow release instead of the original vacuum cleaner they had tried to use on my life. The certification clause was gone, vanished. Not even a ghost of it. I read every line. Women are often trained to treat money as the emotional finish line. It is not. Terms are where dignity lives. Non-disparagement can muzzle you. Cooperation clauses can be twisted into unpaid servitude. Reference language can rescue or poison a career. I marked what mattered. No admission by me, no waiver of protected communications, no restriction on lawful cooperation with investigations, no clawback if I told the truth to regulators, courts, or investors where permitted. Len watched me annotate and said, "You have counsel, clearly." I looked up. Now I have time for it. Noah hid a smile. We negotiated for hours, sometime through the afternoon. I asked for reimbursement of legal fees up to a cap. I asked for payment timing with penalties for delay. I asked for confirmation that my departure would be characterized internally as a restructuring decision, not a performance issue. Not because I needed their approval, but because lies spread faster than resumes. Then I added one more thing. I want my deferred compensation fully accelerated if the pending transaction is materially restructured and closes within the existing strategy window. Len blinked. That is unusual. So was firing the diligence lead while the capital stack was still breathing. He wrote it down. What most people miss about revenge is that the dramatic moment is rarely the scream, it is the invoice. By the next week, the 1.5 billion deal had not died, but it had changed shape. Minority investors demanded revised voting protections. Lenders required cleaner disclosure schedules and tighter covenants around affiliate arrangements. An independent committee reviewed internal approvals. A board member resigned from one subsidiary. Fees ballooned. Delays spread. Confidence, once cracked, charged interest. Then came the personal jewel. June called me from a park, voice low with delight. Dax is out. I closed my eyes. Out how? Administrative leave became departure. They said leadership transition. Around the office, people are saying he tried to get too clever with disclosure and then got rid of the wrong analyst. Vice president, actually. But I let that go. Victory did not need title correction. What about his equity? Complicated, June said. There are whispers about forfeiture fights. I leaned against my kitchen counter and let myself enjoy the view from moral altitude. Fired men love to discover process. A few days later, I signed the revised separation agreement on my terms, not theirs. There was money, yes, enough to cushion my landing and fund a real pause. But the better prize was structural. My name was cleared. My rights were preserved. Their paper no longer tried to convert my silence into their shield. Rhea took me out for dinner to celebrate. She lifted her glass. To strategic women. I lifted mine. To reading the attachments. We laughed, and I thought about how often women are told power is charisma, volume, beauty, or luck. Those things may open a door. They do not protect the house. Real power is understanding signatures, incentives, control rights, beneficiary designations, debt triggers, and what happens when family, business, and ego collide around money. I had learned that young and painfully. At 26, I had been publicly shoved out of a glittering firm by a man who mistook status for immunity. In return, I had not yelled, posted, threatened, or begged. I had done something far crueler. I had made his investors ask follow-up questions. And as every corporate woman eventually learns, there are few sounds more satisfying than a room full of powerful men suddenly using the phrase outside counsel with the frightened respect usually reserved for weather. I thought the story ended there. I was wrong. Because the final turn did not come from Dax. It came from the family office that had been watching the entire mess with growing admiration. And they wanted to hire me. The offer came from Auric Loom Partners, a private family office with old money manners and new money caution. They had been one of the sidelined investor groups in the Dan Capital transaction, large enough to matter, discreet enough to survive. Their chief investment officer, Sela Voss, invited me to breakfast sometime in the early morning at a hotel dining room where everyone looked as if they had inherited both silver and opinions. Sela was in her 50s, sharp as citrus, and uninterested in flattery. "You did something rare," she said after coffee arrived. "You protected your own position without burning evidentiary integrity." I smiled. "That sounds almost romantic." "It is better," she said. "It is bankable." She offered me a role leading governance diligence across direct investments and real estate vehicles. Better pay, better economics. A seat at the table instead of a folding chair near the printer. But what sold me was one sentence. "We do not treat compliance as decorative." I nearly applauded. At Auric Loom, I found something close to justice and far closer to usefulness. My days filled with operating agreements, property easements, trustee powers, key person clauses, elder abuse safeguards for family beneficiaries, and negotiation strategies that protected the quiet people money usually rolls over. I reviewed title structures that kept widows from losing homes to sloppy deed planning. I flagged partnership terms that would have trapped daughters caring for aging parents, while brothers controlled distributions. I rewrote investment approval processes so no one charming could outrun documentation again. Turns out, revenge ages beautifully when converted into policy. As for Dax, news drifted in the way embarrassing truths often do, carried by former colleagues and market gossip. He landed somewhere smaller. There were disputes over compensation. A reputation issue followed him like a cologne applied too generously. No prison, no dramatic collapse, no television-worthy explosion. Just the slow professional tax of being known as clever in the wrong way. That was enough for me. Months later, I ran into him at an industry conference, around late afternoon, near a table of sad pastries. He looked polished, thinner, and deeply aware that rooms remembered. "Mina," he said, attempting a smile. "You landed well." "I did," I said. He shifted. A lot became exaggerated. There it was, the final refuge of a man defeated by paper. Not innocence, exaggeration. I took a sip of coffee. No, Dax. It became legible. He stared at me, and for one lovely second he had nothing. No boardroom tone, no polished phrase, no silk tie wisdom. Then I left him with the pastries. People love stories where revenge is explosive, but my favorite kind is compound interest. It grows in silence. It rewards discipline. And it turns insult into leverage and leverage into security. A firing nearly broke my pride. Instead, it taught me the difference between being impressive and being protected. If you work in business, learn the plumbing, not just the paint. Read your severance before your tears dry. Understand who controls the entity, who benefits from the trust, whose name is on the deed, what the lender can call, what the board actually approved, and what your signature may bless for years after the applause fades. Charm is lovely. Governance is armor. I was 26 when a man told me I was not trusted. He was right in one small way. He should not have trusted me to disappear quietly. By the time the market finished retelling our story, the headline was no longer that I had been fired. It was that a young woman walked out carrying a cardboard box and, without stealing a page, she shook $1.5 billion hard enough to make the people at the top finally read the fine print. That was not magic. That was preparation wearing heels.